All right.
There you go.
There we go. Let's hope it stays there. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Kurt and I finally got connected here. I'm going to scoot around, give Kurt a little more personal space.
Morning, everybody.
Let's see if we can get that. Tell you what, pull that top one out there,
All right.
Kurt. There we go. That way you can see our shoulders and not just our bobbing heads. All right. Okay, so good morning. Sorry for the delay and the little bit of technical difficulty here, and fingers crossed that we have good internet. I did talk to the site manager here at the farm, and he told me that when they start downloading their imagery, when they fly a lot of fields with UAVs and collect lots of this like NASA size files, when they start downloading that stuff, everything just kind of bogs way down. So that might be what occasionally happens here. So anyway, good morning, everyone. Kurt and I here with you. Heather's in the room, so producer Heather. So I got a full crew here this morning. Appreciate my colleagues for helping me improve the hopefully improve the content and the experience of Ask the Agronomist here. And weeds and weed management was going to be a big, and fungicides, and so kind of crop protection related stuff. So I've got the crop protection A team here with me today with Kurt and Heather. And as always, please chat in your questions. We love our live audience here at Ask the Agronomist. Appreciate everybody who eventually watches these episodes recorded. Always encourage live participation, so you can chat in your questions. Kurt and I will not talk about everything you want to know about, and if we're not talking about what you want to know about, chat in a question, and Heather will be watching the chat. So I know, Kurt, you busy time of year for you and everybody in the retail application world. Lots of applications have been made. We've had pretty good conditions, I would say, for
overall,
for days to get work done, and things have been not as easy to kill as we would like. But I guess one topic that I like to talk about every time we get on this subject is the notion of weed management as opposed to weed control. Weed control was kind of the term for ever and ever and ever, and it's not quite as I guess creates the wrong expectation is kind of what I think about the term weed control, because we can't just always do everything we want to do. And so as we think about managing weeds in a way that gives you options, gives you the ability to achieve the level of weed control that you're looking for, I guess kind of what are some general thoughts that you would share around that?
I'd love to do that, Lance. So, I always look at every new year as a new learning experience, so I've been doing this a long time.
We've learned a lot then.
Across a lot of different years, a lot of different situations, a lot of different jobs in my career, different responsibilities. And I guess when I look at the year in a whole, and I look at the performance of products, as of today and kind of what's going on, it really has come down to a handful of things that we fight with almost every year. And one of them is did we make the right adjustments coming out of last year, with our weeds in our fields? Did we increase rates? Did we not? Did we switch products if maybe something wasn't living up to expectations? Did we do those things? What did the weather do? When did we plant? When did we spray? What kind of conditions did we spray in? And the reason I'm, saying all these things is because now when I tie a bow on what we've seen, since we started spraying the first part of April is, in corn, because we're definitely seeing the results of our pre and our post at this moment, is if you sprayed on time at the right rate with your pre, then and planted your corn and came back again at the right time with the right products and the right rate post, our success level has been pretty high. And where we didn't make adjustments, say we sprayed the same rates as we did last year, and we put it out there.
Hoped it would work better than it did.
Say last year was a fluke, and we put it out there 2 to 3 weeks before we planted corn. Waited till the weeds were 6 inches to a foot tall before we came back post sprayed. Maybe didn't add another product to the post trip to kind of help with some of them larger weeds. And, those are some not so good situations. So yeah, like I said, in general, that's what I'm seeing, higher rates, on the post side. That's been really interesting because we're still in that, and we are kind of coming down the home stretch on the first pass of post, but there has been, maybe a few more resprays than normal. And what I'm seeing there, and I was recommending this to my customers all winter long. I said we have to use multiple modes of action post as well.
Right.
And I know for some folks it's been a little bit uncomfortable to maybe bring dicamba back into the post corn, with some of the challenges that brings. But it really has made a big difference where we did it up front and on time, and that's been the key,
kind of a plan as opposed to the rescue.
Right.
Yeah.
The things that didn't work quite. So yeah, perfect example of that, Lance. The plan was, maybe we did have a good high rate of pre, say 16 ounces of tribal. That has worked fairly well overall. And then we came back and our plan post was for 3 ounces of Lotus, let's say. But we're out there, and maybe there's a few more weeds than we expected, or a few bigger weeds than we expected. We did have some weather the middle of the month that knocked us out of the field until Memorial Day. So I mean, that happens too. So sometimes the weeds are a little bigger. So then they throw in some dicamba. And maybe they didn't call first, and it wasn't enough. We needed to use at least 8, and we only put on 6, or we needed to use 10 or 12, and we only put on 8.
Right.
So where we were more proactive, and it was actually part of the plan to do it in the first place, we were much more successful.
Right.
So
well, and I've encountered a lot of situations where, kind of back to what you were talking about, what I did last year, I wasn't happy with. So I wanted to do something different this year. So we switched from product A to product B, when what we probably should have done was add product B to product A.
Right.
And so, no secret that there's HPPD resistance out there, and some of our HPPD products are not, always as lethal as they used to be. So people who are comfortable with dicamba and corn, in some cases, switch to dicamba and corn, as opposed to combining those two effective modes of action together, which would be my preference. And even when you use them together, the thing you got to realize is if you're targeting an HPPD resistant water hemp with, say, Lotus and dicamba, and let's say it's Diflex, you got to have a high enough rate of Diflex to kill that weed by itself. Right. Because the Lotus is not going to help a lot on that HPPD resistant plant. And what I see people doing is they're using an okay rate of both, thinking that they'll work together, which they do on the susceptible weeds. But on the resistant weeds, it might be just one or the other that's doing the bulk of the work. And then you have to have a high enough rate that, that one product that's working can get the job done, virtually by itself.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out, Lance, because another thing I have seen is some people switched from, say Callisto or Lotus because they didn't feel like they were getting the level of control they needed. And they just switched to a higher rate of, Status or Diflex on its own. And quite frankly, folks, the results have been mixed there as well.
Right.
So yes, when we add the two together, it definitely seems to be better. And there's I've been a big proponent of this, spray earlier, spray the right size weeds, all those things. And Lance will have to come out and say something here this morning. I have learned this year that growing conditions trump weed size, guys. So we had and Heather, she's down there nodding her head at the other producer, Heather. We did see a few days there, the middle of the month before the rain, around the time of the dust storms and some of the things going on there, that were not the greatest days to spray, no matter what we had in the tank. And when we came back after that rain that we finally got there right before Memorial Day, and things dried out, and we were going after some larger weeds, and with the exact same programs, we were, scorching them right to the ground. So there is a weather condition component to all of this as well.
And that would be a tough one for me, because I hate waiting.
I'm terrible at it. I was telling my retailers during that time frame, spray. And where we
Yeah.
got rained out of some situations, it was like, well, maybe this wasn't all bad.
Yeah.
And I'm not telling everybody here today that we need to wait for perfect conditions. I'm just saying there is a component that if something, again, and that's the main point here, guys, if something didn't work, there's usually a pretty good explanation why it didn't work,
Right.
So, and that's the thing. And that's why, we're doing what we're doing and using the products we're using. And, at Bear, if something does go a little bit wrong, we stand behind it. And we help guys get things, fixed up, cleaned up.
So relative to that,
Right.
that I struggle with that too, because I'm there's situations that I honestly think not trying to fix it would be the best thing.
Right.
And that's hard for
Right.
people to make that decision. So let's say you've missed something.
Right.
What do I do now?
Right. And I said that all on purpose as kind of a setup, because I'm not a big fan of say, well, if it doesn't work, we use the respray program. But I said that on purpose to kind of set up the conversation, because there are some of those decisions going on out there right now. And guys, again, Lance used the term weed management. And I know, personally myself, if I see one water hemp in an 80-acre field, that bothers me, but we can't get away from the agronomic or the economic as well. What we have to do is take a good hard look at the field and say, okay, what are we accomplishing here? And most of the time in these situations where things maybe didn't go as planned, it's in the areas of the field where there was a little higher pressure. And typically those are the outside perimeters of the field.
Right.
So I always challenge anyone that when they're in a situation where they think they may need to retreat, get more than 50 rows away from the edge. Because most of the time when we get away from the perimeters and away from the areas where we have the higher pressure and potentially the larger weeds on the first post pass, the control's good, or if there are any weeds, they're very scattered and very, very few. And quite frankly, kind of banged up too from the original treatment. So again, be targeted in what you do. And the other thing too is if they are still banged up and looking like they're dead, but maybe not sure, our chances of killing 100% of that population post are pretty small. Yeah. So just keep all that in mind as you're retreating. So
and my recommendation has always been, if it looks like death warmed over, it's going to be virtually impossible to kill with anything. But there are times when you can kind of push it over the edge and get the job done. Do you want to wait to see some regrowth, or what's your strategy?
So again,
there?
Again, with corn, it's a little different deal because we're running into situations where, we have to stop, we get in that V8 to V10 period, leading up to fall, we have to stop. There's just way too many bad things that can happen.
Right.
So a lot of times we do have to make those decisions on the fly and pretty quickly. And I tell guys, if it looks like we got a chance at killing these weeds, let's do something right now. Even if we maybe have minimal regrowth, because we have the time component. But just know that we're still probably not going to get 100% of those weeds, no matter how much. Because I get this a lot. Well, status versus Diflex. I don't care which one. They both.
Well, you kind of do.
I do, yeah. I have sales goals to hit. And I get those questions a lot. Which one should I use, and which one's better, which one's safer? Blah blah blah. I get on and on and on and on. And honestly, guys, in my opinion, and this goes back to my retail days, there's about zero difference in the two products. Yes, they are formulated a little different. Yes, they have different rates of dicamba in them, but from a weed control standpoint, safety standpoint, there isn't 10 cents worth of difference between the two products. So, but with that said,
and they're both very good and effective at the right rate on the right weeds, and
they're both very effective at the right rate and the right timing, the right adjuvants. So there again, if you're going after them, don't be afraid to throw a maybe almost scary rate out there, and still know that those ones that are banged up really bad, we're probably not going to kill them completely.
Well, and as the Kurt's more the chemistry guy, I'm more the crop guy, personally, and a lot of weed scientists would be critical of the comment that I'm going to make, because everybody's all about managing the weed seed bank and not letting weeds go to seed, and you especially don't want to let resistant weeds go to seed. But the reality is, I'm kind of a numbers guy, and your soil on every acre you farm has got millions of weed seeds in it, right now, and adding another 100,000 to a million is probably not going to significantly change your life. Trying to kill something that you can't kill in a big crop and knocking 20 bushel yield off your corn crop in the process, that frustrates me. And honestly, living with a few weeds frustrates me less. But that's kind of a personal decision. And, as long as you understand that you're taking a risk with your crop, anytime you're spraying high rates of anything on a big crop, that's kind of your call to make. But I don't really like pushing the label. I would love to not be dinging crop, and there are situations where it's going to be really hard to finish off those hard to control weeds with a rate of a product that doesn't have some potential to have a negative impact on the crop. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, sure. Lance is a numbers guy, and I'm a storyteller. So, I mean, so to back to that point, I've been with some situations here in the last couple of weeks, and I'm maybe, in a level, because I feel like there's the risk reward is not there, so I'm trying to talk the grower or retailer out of respraying a field. And I always preface it this way: I say, guys, it's not that I'm trying to get out of a claim here. I just don't maybe feel like we're going to get the desired result for the money we're going to spend and the time it's going to take.
Right.
And the first story I'm going to tell was the first situation was, we talked about it for quite a while, and the guy said, yeah, but I think I'm still going to respray it. And I'm like, okay, fine, let's do it. Let's do it as quickly as possible and move on. And then a couple of days later, you're having a different story in a different field, in a different situation, but the weeds are the same as what you looked at 2 days ago, and you talk about it for a while, and you go, yeah, I think I'll just leave them. So at the end of the day, it's your decision to make, but just remember just do take some time to think about the risk and the reward and the cost, because I mean there's always even with some help, there's always still some cost.
I mean, we're in almost all these situations, we're dealing with pride, appearance, and possibly some seed production on these weeds. Rarely is there enough weed pressure in these fields to hurt the yield of your crop.
Correct.
The herbicide is far more likely to hurt the yield of your crop than those few straggler sick weeds that you can't stand to look at. So
especially the later and later we get here, we need to, if you're thinking about retreating, that V8, V9 area, we need to be done. So, otherwise at that point we are going to hurt yield, and we're still not going to kill weeds.
Yeah. And there's very little corn out there, unless you planted later than most, that wouldn't be that V7,
right
V8,
it's getting there.
So it's time to be done real soon. And we got several chances of rain coming up here over the next week. And, I would say if we aren't done with herbicide applications before the next rain event, we're kind of done anyway, because unless you want to play with drops or do something that nobody likes to do. The over the top window in corn is about to close. I'll tell a little bit of a story. I had a dealer customer that had a less than perfect post efficacy on a program, and his grower opted to it's kind of a dirty word these days, but had access to a row crop cultivator and decided to do some cultivation. And I know the dealer that you and I work with, he's a young guy. He thinks that before his career is over, everybody's going to be row crop cultivating again. And I think that's something that's a little bit hard for people to imagine. And I gave that dealer credit. I don't even know who the grower was, but I said, I appreciate his willingness to do something different. And there are a lot of situations that a little bit of cultivation would fix the problem. Now I'm a no-till guy, as you all know, and I know we're not really set up to row crop cultivate, significant acres anymore these days, but there are some little bit out of the box things that we maybe need to incorporate back into that weed management conversation. And another one that I like to harp on a little bit is starting clean. And what I think oftentimes happens is we miss a few weeds with our tillage, or we miss a few weeds with our burn down, or we skip a burn down when we should have done one because the field's basically clean. And some of that stuff that we let get going early turns into this.
Yeah.
And if there's only 6 of these out there,
Come in.
yeah, we're holding big weeds here if you can't see. So
really
I,
big weeds.
I could
So
hide
there's
behind
roots,
this giant ragweed here.
More like bushes
Now
than
I'd probably
weeds.
rather kill what I've got than what Kurt's
Yeah,
got,
this one over here is pretty tough.
because that one's harder to kill. There's about 1,000 growing points on that, and I've Heather, I spent I spent a long time trying to convince my wife that was a foot. But I never got that done. And what would you say the height of that? Well, let's use the water hemp here. So, how tall is that water hemp plant? Is that
Move it in.
so there's I don't have basketball player hands, but there's my hand next to that. So Heather was prepared. Heather actually brought us a tape measure. So we'll let Heather be the decision here. Let's see. There's the soil line. We won't cheat.
It's about 21 inches.
Okay. I was going to say 18. So hell, I'm off too. So
Right, yeah.
so-
I was just, yeah.
so
16, 18.
so that's according to Heather's tape measure, that's a 21-inch tall water hemp plant. That's not on anybody's label.
Right.
What, Kurt? I'll put you on the spot. If you had to pick a percentage number, what's your odds of killing that plant?
10%.
10. Okay. Yeah. I that's about where I would have been too.
Yeah.
What are your odds of defoliating him?
Oh, you'll not believe.
Right.
it.
Right.
You'll-
100% chance of
Yeah.
making it look like you killed it for a while.
Right.
And then it's just gonna, you're gonna turn it into a bush, because at every leaf axil, that's what's so insidious about water hemp from a weed science standpoint. So everywhere a branch attaches to the stem, everywhere a petiole attaches to a smaller stem, at every one of those points is a dormant bud.
Yeah.
Growing point. And those are all points from which this plant can regrow and recover. And the problem is, the one product that was good at translocating to the growing points, including the roots, and killing big weeds, this one's resistant to that product. And what I'm talking about is Roundup. And everything else was never really good at that ever, and it hasn't gotten any better. We can defoliate weeds like this, but we can't kill a big water hemp plant like this, because there's too many growing points on this plant that defoliating it is not going to kill. And you've got a lot of stored energy and stored food reserves in a plant that size. It's always going to be able to survive until those growing points get new leaves out there, and then it's going to take off and go. And that's not, how do you know that's not a respray miss, Kurt?
Well, usually when they're a miss, they'll be branched.
Yes.
At the bottom.
You'll turn it into a bush. You'll blow, you might top it, and then
it'll come out.
you're going to have branches coming out of the bottom here. So when you're walking your fields in July or August, trying to convince somebody that you need to respray something, which you shouldn't do then, by the way, and you're finding plants that are branched and bushy and don't have a single main stem like that, when we're talking about water hemp here, that's not a late flush. That's not a weed that came up 2 weeks before you're there. That's a weed that was there when you sprayed the field in May, and we just missed it. You heard it, and it recovered. Eventually, it gets up bigger than your beans, and that's when people start, being concerned about doing something.
Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about multiple modes of action. We talked a little bit about effective rates. We talked about timing. Just in general, and Kurt made a good point that if conditions are awful, and awful conditions for post would be dry, dusty, cool, low humidity, anything else, cloudy maybe, just all that stuff is not conducive to uptake of products. So and I it's hard to be too early, in my opinion. We need to generally not wait. So even if waiting's the right thing to do, I'd be afraid to tell somebody to wait. That's like telling you guys to put your grain in storage and wait for a better price.
Right.
I mean, that's a dangerous recommendation for a farmer, because that's what you're all going to do anyway. And encouraging that just makes it worse.
Right.
And so while I appreciate Kurt's storytelling, and I certainly agree there are situations where waiting would be the right thing to do, the problem is it's really hard to know that until after the fact.
It is. It's almost impossible, Lance. And when I said that, guys, I mean, if it's a really bad day, for spraying, I mean, I realize that sometimes we just have to spray. I mean, we have to spray to keep up, and even as even if you've got your own sprayer and you're self-applying, you've got to get done, and you got to get done timely. Just don't go to your weediest field and spray it that day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always, again, I spent a big portion of my career in retail, and you have to spray every day, and you have to spray on days when there's not the best conditions. But don't purposely go to your worst problem fields on a day when your success might not be as good. And sometimes that's what you want to do. It's like, oh my God, that thing's terrible, I got to spray it today. And maybe sometimes wait until tomorrow would actually be better. So
and that'd be a good kind of a little bit of a segue into adjuvants a little.
Hold on though.
Yes.
We have a question.
We have a real question. Awesome.
Merle.
Thank you, Merle.
How effective are the electric shock applicators on the 21-inch water hemp?
You had any personal? I know you got neighbors that do that, and I do too.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't have a lot of personal experience.
I think it's very effective as long as you can touch the weed.
Right.
If you get that 10,000 volts going through that weed, I think it's dead. And
I do too.
That technology is actually better on the big ones than it is the small ones, because the small ones you can't get it to.
Right.
They need to be up and big. So, it's very effective. It's expensive, and it's slow, and it's kind of a far as I know, basically just an organic thing is the only place I've seen those utilized, and I've seen guys waller through some pretty big beans with a fairly good sized tractor with a 15-foot wide implement on it. So the wheel tracks alone were a little hard for me to swallow, but I think if you can get the current to it, I think it's dead.
I think it's pretty effective.
Yeah. So let's talk adjuvants a little bit. We have situations where, and I've made these recommendations where we're burning corn too much early. Mm-hmm. We start lowering rates and taking stuff out and switching to safer stuff. Sometimes you need to go the other way. You need to get more aggressive with it. So what kind of general recommendations do you have in that area?
So the general recommendations I have in that, guys, the first and foremost thing you need to remember is we got to kill the weeds. And sometimes we get in the situation where we don't want we don't burn the corn, and so then we don't kill the weeds.
Right.
So the first then that's it. That's first and foremost. We have to kill the weeds. The label gives us some really good guidelines. Experience gives us even more. The issues that that you run into sometimes are the limitations of what you can use. So if you start putting crop oil with things that are supposed to have NIS, well then you're going to have unwanted crop response. The other things that you run into is one product may have, you can use NIS, crop oil, or MSO. You can use all three. Right. But the product you're going to tank mix it with, you can only use NIS. Well, then you have to do that. You can't go to you got to go to the one that's more restrictive.
Right.
So, and you'll have better results there. The main thing with adjuvants, guys, is just, if you've got any questions on that stuff, I mean, give us a call. We can kind of help you walk through that, because there's been some misses there. I mean, we could have, maybe used a crop oil instead of an NIS and gotten a little better results, or we could have taken a MSO out and put an NIS in and not have had such a detrimental effect on flashing and burning. But in general, guys, that's the main thing is, the labels there, always go to the more restrictive if you're tank mixing, and you'll have less issues. And we got to kill the weeds. I mean, about everything we spray can have a negative response in the right conditions. But the main thing is we just got to kill the weeds.
Yeah. Okay, so we kind of talked about respray there. So how about what would you advise someone? What should be the goal of your pre-program?
Yeah, that's a really good one there, Lance. So in general, again, back to generalities, but I've been saying for a couple of years, my counterparts in the industry are saying the same thing. We got to increase the rates of our pre so that they last longer, so that we're spraying fewer weeds. And walking fields with you guys and retailers, I'm like, okay, we're getting there, guys, on the soybeans. They look pretty solid this year for as long as some of those residuals have been out there. I mean, they're pretty clean. We keep adding things to the mix, and they're starting to look pretty good. I'm feeling a little better about post bean spraying, even though I wish we were maybe a tad farther along with it, or started maybe a few days sooner. Again, back to the weed size thing. Corn guys, I still think we got some work to do. I mean, and we're still not quite high enough yet. Some of the issues that we've been talking about here for the last half hour on and off are directly related back to the fact that we didn't have quite enough pre-herbicide out there. Weed size and weed density are what we're most concerned about. If we got to get it down to where there's just scattered weeds in the field. So that's when we have the most success post.
Yeah, I mean, when two pass programs became popular, the idea of the pre was to control some weeds, but you always knew in the back of your mind you were going to respray the field anyway with your second pass, and we were supremely confident that whatever the pre didn't get, we'd kill it later. So we weren't too worried about some weeds coming through the pre. And I, Kurt said I'm a numbers guy. It does kind of come down to numbers when if you're controlling 95% plus of your weeds with your pre, you've got a better chance of success of having a clean field when you make your post. If your pre is only controlling 70% of your weeds, pretty likely there's more weeds out there at the timing of the post trip than that product's going to be able to control. And so we need to have pre-programs that are almost good enough without the post, to end up with the level of weed control that a lot of you are looking for. Now we could, make a huge cultural shift, and you guys could decide that 85% weed control is good enough. I don't think you will.
I don't think we will.
But you could.
We could.
Yeah. So to get the level of weed control that we've come to expect here in Central Illinois, you have to have a really good pre. And I was with a grower. I'll tell a story last week, and he's probably watching, so I'll be careful what I say. He went with a 20-ounce tribal program with the plan of the interior of the field would be pre only, and he would just lap the field with a post. And I'll be honest, that's what he did. And you can find, we were walking a field the other day looking at other issues. We weren't there looking at weed control, but I did see one water hemp plant out in the interior of the field. I saw it, so I pulled it. And it was healthy. It was 6 inches tall. It was going to be pretty robust by harvest. And the tri-volt missed that one. That's the only one I saw. And the field was essentially clean. Now, I'm sure there was a few others out there that I didn't see. Now, the outside was weedier, as you said, and he posted the outside. Unfortunately, the post missed every weed he sprayed post. So even though he two-passed the outside's still worse than where he didn't do the post, because we missed stuff post. And it could have been a better post program, and next year it probably will be a better post program. But in that example, you did the best you could have done pre. and you still need a good post, to get the level of weed control that we're looking for. And I get it. You're all already frustrated at what everything costs, and most of what Kurt and I talk about costs more than what you've been doing. And that's a tough decision we've got to make too. Is there's a
Yep. Are we willing to spend even more?
Yes.
And I think and unfortunately, guys, I think we need to. I mean,
right.
back to Lance's story. I have said that to different folks along the way. I think we need to, 20 the one pass rate. Using air quotes.
Yeah.
That maybe that needs to be our 2 pass rate.
Yeah.
And that way we're not dealing with as many weeds. On the post side.
Yeah.
It's been working.
And the challenge is, whether there's one weed out there or a million, the post pass still has to be effective. But it's a lot easier to be effective on one weed than it is a million. Because the odds of that one weed being the one you can't kill, aren't very good. But if there's a million out there, pretty good chance there's some of those that we can't kill. And it just, your odds are better with the better the pre works. And I would agree with Kurt's comment as well. Some of these bean fields, I want that post pass on within 30 or 40 days of the pre. And there were some pre's this year that worked so well, you probably could have stretched that out a little bit and still been okay. But the reason we don't want to stretch it out too much is we're putting additional residual on, typically with our post. And we want that additional residual to get on before the first one you put on quits working completely, so they can overlap. Yeah. So we've, for years and years and years, we've used multiple applications of residuals that didn't overlap. Because if there's 60 days between your pre and your post, there's no overlapping going on there, because that residual that you put out there pre-plant, has deteriorated, broken down, leached, whatever, metabolized to the point where it's really not effective anymore. And so there's about a 2 or 3 week gap, that's, it's supposed to be an overlap. It's not supposed to be a gap.
Right.
And so keeping that post application closer to the pre, that's why that's important. And there's a lot of guys that are afraid that, well, if I spray too early, I'll have to do it again. Well, my argument is we're doing it again anyway, in a lot of cases, because we missed stuff with the post pass, because we waited too long, weeds were too big, or there were too many of them. And you're doing a 3-pass program already, just we're doing a poor 3-pass program. Right. Well, I would rather do a good 3-pass program if we have to. So, kind of back to that, I hate waiting because of, if you're waiting because conditions are crappy, that's sometimes okay and the right thing to do. If you're waiting because you don't think your crop is big enough to spray, that's the kind of waiting that I don't really like. Just be timely with those applications. If we get another flush, we can deal with that.
Right.
I would much rather be dealing with another flush later than a pissed off weed that we missed later.
Exactly.
Which is typically what we're doing.
And I want to, a little more clarification on what Lance said there, the overlapping piece, because there's a lot of fields out here where the residual's been on 60 days and the post treatment hasn't happened yet. Yeah. And what happens sometimes in those situations, and on previous episodes, Lance, we talked about thin beans and 15-inch no-till.
Right.
Well, okay, so we spray today, right? Our residual that we sprayed 60 days ago is gone. There's no real rain in the forecast here for about a week.
Right.
Tomorrow, a new water hemp emerges.
Right.
Because we don't have the overlap anymore. The pre that's been out there 60 days is gone. We spray and then we do finally get the rain. Well, that new residual is not going to do anything to that weed that emerges tomorrow, and then we'll be out there respraying.
Yeah. When it appears as though that additional residual you use with your post pass did nothing for you, that's what happened.
That's what happened.
Because those products are very effective at controlling water hemp, but they have to get activated.
Right.
And the other thing they need to be is on the soil. So if you're spraying big beans and big weeds and none of that post pass is falling on the soil, in those scenarios, there is limited value to that additional residual. It needs to be on the soil, and then it needs to rain. And it needs to rain more than 2/10. And Kurt's right. We've got several chances of rain in the forecast, but all these forecasted rains are going to do is grow tar spot,
Right.
because it's just enough to kind of keep
Next
stuff
topic.
damp. Yeah,
Right, yeah,
that's
next topic.
coming up on the list here. So little foreshadowing there.
Yeah.
So we will touch real quick on, everybody's always wanting to know, well, what's, when Pursuit quit working, Roundup saved us.
Mm-hmm.
When Roundup didn't work as good anymore, we had, dicamba, 2,4-D, and Liberty that are kind of sort of halfway saving us. What's on the horizon that's going to save us again? And I'm not sure we should expect to be saved from weeds anyway. You can, there are ways you can be saved, but we won't talk about that here on Ask the Agronomist.
Right.
But there, there's new products coming, new chemistries coming, new trait systems coming. Heather has a question.
No, actually, Tom Kennel has a question.
Oh, well, that's even better than Heather's question then. So good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Tom. What's the line between increasing pre's and stunting beans? I have a field where I increased rates on pre's and has no weeds. Problem is beans are half the size.
Yeah.
Actually, a great segue.
That is a real situation, and especially for those of us who like to no-till, and especially for those of us who like to plant early. And I would say that there is a pretty consistent correlation between the level of weed control and the level of crop response when it comes to pre's and in soybeans. And if you've got perfectly clean fields still 60 days out, that crop probably is a little smaller because the good pre you've used is probably slowing that crop down. We can plant later, we can do more tillage, we can remove residue, we can, we've talked before about how to minimize, the impacts of that cold weather stress and the interaction with herbicides. Maybe we'll be able to switch to some products that have a little bit less of that effect in the near future. One of the new things we've got coming, maybe has the potential to have less response on the crop and still give us some water temp control. For the past, how long have we had PPOs? 15 years in beans, probably. I mean, the PPO chemistry, which some people have been trying to avoid, and there are ways you can, Kurt's got some program options if you want to try to avoid that. But taking PPOs out of your pre is eliminating the best water hemp control products we have. Yep. So we want to be careful doing that. Kurt said that we got to control the weeds. And so, some level of crop response in soybeans from a pre should be expected. And just because they grow slower doesn't necessarily guarantee you that they're going to yield less. It does guarantee you that you're going to be frustrated, and somebody else's beans might be bigger and might be prettier. And that's hard. That's hard for us to take sometimes. But I'll let Kurt share his thoughts and any recommendations he might have along those lines.
Yeah. So Tom, without knowing what you use, Tom, I mean, I'm seeing some of that this year. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier in my other conversation about the pre-rates, at the end goal is we have to control the weeds, and you probably made that decision for a reason. You wanted to get more ahead of the water hemp. At this point, to Lance's point, I mean, I don't know that I would be concerned as much about the beans being slow, because I think they're gonna be, I think in the end here they'll be fine, because there's more to it than maybe just the pre-herbicides. Some environmental situations and that have led to a little more of that than normal too. But again, I don't have a lot to add to what Lance already said, other than we have to control the weeds, and sometimes that is the only way we can do it.
Time will tell. I mean, if that field ends up being your best beans, Tom, that'll give you some real confidence that I can stand some crop response and still raise really good beans. Now, if that field ends up being not your best beans, you're always going to have it in the back of your mind. Well,
did I use too high a rate?
Yeah, would they have been better if that had happened to them? So best case scenario is, I hope that's the best farm of beans you have, Tom, and then you can sleep at night that, hey, I can be really mean to my beans and still raise really good beans. I was with a guy the other day who I won't name him, but he's one of Kurt's best friends and a farmer that we work with. His brother kind of likes tillage a little bit, and his brother told him the other day, he says, we're working every acre of corn stalks this fall. I'm done with no-till beans. Now that's probably a bit of an overreaction, but if some of your acres are tilled and some of your acres are no-till, I bet you can tell which is which. And, so there's lots of questions about, how much tillage do I need to do in soybeans? How early can I plant? What's the interaction between early planting, residue, cold soils, and herbicide? There is one, and it's not positive for growth. A little bit of an unknown how much it impacts yield, but I get it. The point of planting beans early is to get them to canopy early, get them to flower early, get them to get into the reproductive growth stages earlier. And if at the same time we're stunning them and slowing them down, that seems counterproductive to the goal of planting them early in the first place. So I get the frustration of that.
Lance, I do. I literally just thought of something because it's been something I've been trying to forget.
Okay.
Sorry
to remind you of it, Kurt.
Right. So back to your story, your thing, Tom, here. So, there's a lot of technology in the marketplace, and my retailer is using Exact Apply.
Mm-hmm.
And when they measured out one of my fields earlier in the season, they went around a waterway and they missed just a little spot on the other side. So, Tom, this part of the field, no-till, 15-inch row beans planted April 11th. They've looked pretty homely for a long time, and they're finally starting to look pretty good. And behind and stunted. And I had a three-way combination PPO, group 15, group 5, so I had metribuzin in there too. It was pretty hot, it really wasn't. And I have a nice clean field of beans so far. So anyway, this about acre on the other side where they just, it just got mapped wrong, did not get sprayed. And the beans are still kind of stunted over there too. And we went in and we actually did a pretty good job of getting the burn, getting it kind of cleaned up. But obviously at that point we were very limited because beans were up. We were very limited on what we could do as far as post residual. And it's working okay, but it's nothing like the other side. But the whole point of the story is that there is no difference in the soybeans, one side of the waterway to the other. Yeah, as far as size.
Yeah.
So I think it's maybe as much environmental as it is the mixtures we're using.
Well, I was in a field a couple days ago with a guy that chopped some silage, and he had about 20 acres of this field that they had chopped silage off of. So it was no-till, didn't do any tillage, but there was minimal residue there. Those of you that chop silage know that there's not much residue out there when you chop silage. You would have thought that part of the field got plowed, based on the size difference in the soybeans. I mean, they were about 4 shades darker green and twice the size compared to the no-till beans in the same field with the same herbicide program. So the residue is a huge factor. And 290 bushel corn makes a lot of residue. And some of our problems were kind of victims of our own success. I mean, there's a lot of soybean residue for corn to deal with a good soybean crop. There's a lot of corn residue for corn or soybeans to deal with in a good corn crop. And everything we do to create more yield creates more residue. And so, we got to figure that out. And sometimes, we want everything, right? We want to be able to plant early. We want to be able to have an affordable program. We want 90 bushel beans that look awesome. It's hard to get all that. Yeah. And so we gotta make some, we gotta be realistic in what we can accomplish. And sometimes you just can't really accomplish everything that, we would like to accomplish. I talk a lot about early planted soybeans on Ask the Agronomist, and I'm a big promoter of early planted soybeans, but the reality is, the first people to do early planted soybeans were on dark prairie soils doing tillage. And then the rest of us that no-till timber soil jumped on the bandwagon too. I want to do that too. That's cool.
That's cool.
Well, okay. You want all you want, but it may not work the same for you that it did for other people. And that's I'm not going to go away from my no-till soybeans, but there are things that tillage will fix, or at least help. I'm not going to burn all my residue off either, but that helps. I do bale some corn stalks for bedding, but there's probably not a big enough bedding market out there to bale all the corn stalks. Anything you do to remove the residue, decompose the residue faster, so that is maybe a more acceptable way to deal with it. Maybe there's something you can do to get your residue to break down faster. Anything you can do to reduce the amount of residue that's there is going to help your beans in the spring, whether there's herbicide on the field
and
or
it'll
not.
help it metabolize the herbicide better as well. So that's the main point of our
So, all right. So thank you, Tom, for the great question, and we appreciate all your questions here today. So we'll skip to the fungicide part of the conversation today. So for about 2 weeks now, I've been talking quite a bit about how I believe that we could be set up for a bad tar spot year this year. And the last 3 growing seasons, 22, 23, and 24, we were blessed with, and I think blessed is the right thing to say. At times it didn't seem like a blessing when we thought our crop was going to dry up and burn up in June. But dry Junes are really not a bad thing. Now, they're hard on weed control.
They are.
They create those hard to control weeds. So that's a bad part of a dry June. But how many of you have heard the old saying, dry June makes good corn? Now I think that's partly because a wet June makes bad corn. So it's not that corn loves drought, but when it's too wet in June, lots of bad things happen. And so if you got a choice between a dry June and a wet June, take the dry one. Now, there is such a thing as too dry, but one thing we've learned the last 3 years is that a dry June does for us is it really stalls out the ability of tar spot to get an early start in corn. And the last time that tar spot was a big deal around here was 2021, and you could find tar spot lesions in corn by the 4th of July. And my guess is if this June weather forecast that I'm looking at on my phone comes to fruition, we will be able to find tar spot in July again this year. So things that there's 3 things that tar spot loves. It loves beautiful green corn. It loves shade. It loves moisture, and it prefers cool weather. But just because it's 90 degrees doesn't mean it's going to stop tar spot. So if you look at that early planted corn in particular, what is that stuff? It's beautiful. It is so dark green, it's almost black. It is big. I mean, you could probably find some corn that's pushing shoulder high out there if you look for it. You've got, we got good stands and most of that. It's pretty dark down in that lower canopy already. And we've had several showers. We've had, June has been, most of the moisture we've had this spring has come in June. And we've got a lot more forecasted. So if you want to be worried about something, I would say we're having very good conditions for the early development of tar spot. And for tar spot to be bad for us, it has to get started early. And my guess is we've got tar spot spores that are infecting corn plants as we speak. You won't be able to see those lesions for 2 to 3 weeks. So infection that's going on now, infection that happens next week, infection that happens the week after that, you'll see that sometime in July. And if you can find tar spot lesions on corn close to pollination time, it's got a lot of time to get bad. It's got a lot of time to interact with other diseases. I had a picture text to me. I'm on a text chat group with some agronomists around the country. If I can find it here real quick. So that is southern rust in Georgia. Now, you may not care about Georgia. Kurt and I are going to drive through Georgia
yeah, we are.
soon. So we'll try not to bring any southern rust spores back with us. But, And again, I don't know what growth stage that corn's at. It's pollinated already. I mean, that's big mature corn because it's in Georgia. So that would be like looking at your corn maybe in July or August, looking at that amount of southern rust. But there's diseases out there. There's diseases out there every year. Diseases interact with each other. The 1 year that tar spot was a big factor for us in Central Illinois, we also had bad crown rot. We had bad southern rust. We had some gray leaf spot. Tar spot got all the credit. It didn't deserve all the credit. Those disasters we saw in 21 from a plant health standpoint were not just tar spot, but there's always other stuff out there, and we haven't in recent years had the right environmental conditions for tar spot to be a big deal. I kind of worry that Mother Nature may be handing us those perfect conditions that tar spot's been waiting for. So we've got, the way I count it, we've got 3 application windows left for fungicide in corn. We've got the pre-tassel, if you choose to do that. We've got the at or just after tassel, which is my personal favorite.
Mine too.
And we've got the, R3, R4, things look god awful, please save me, late post-emergence application. And there's a place for all of those. You may have already done a V5. You may not have done a V5. I'm actually hoping to do some trials with some drones tomorrow to do some. It'll be about a V7 because the corn's bigger than V5, but do some trials tomorrow with some early vegetative applications. So Kurt and I'll spend a little bit of time here kind of talking about the pros and cons of those 3 application windows. If you choose to do the pre-tassel option, which has been semi-popular with some people in recent years, there's a product on the market that's pretty popular that likes to brag about their residual and likes to recommend going early. Some of you that maybe don't like aerial applications, don't have a true high boy, you like the idea of being able to get over your shoulder high corn with a standard post rig. There's nothing wrong with that application, in my opinion, other than it locks you into needing another one, in my opinion, because you're not going to protect the plant season long spraying it when it's shoulder high. I don't care how much somebody brags about their residual. It's going to give you 2 or 3 weeks of residual, and 2 or 3 weeks is not going to get you to black layer. And with diseases like southern rust and tar spot that have the potential to infect all year long, we need to protect the plant later. Now some people's idea to protect the plant later has been to wait till brown silk to put applications on. I don't really like that recommendation either, because there's a lot of infection that has already occurred, especially in the weather that we've got coming up here, before you get to brown silk. So my recommendation, and I'll let Kurt chime in here, is going to be to use a good product, use a good, go back to rate again. It's going to sound a lot like the herbicide talk we just had. More is often better. So you use a good product, use the right appropriate rate, which might be higher than the rate you've used in the past, and get that product on basically as soon as you've got tassels. So tassel, green silk, I don't really like spraying before I've got tassels. But as soon as you've got tassels, you don't need to wait for brown silk. You don't need to wait for the crop to be pollinated. You don't have to wait for, every single plant in the field to be tasseled. Get that application on. And then the way I like to recommend deciding whether you're going to need another one is about 3 weeks after your first one, go find some unsprayed corn. And, might be some of your unsprayed corn, might be some of your neighbor's unsprayed corn, might be, find somebody else's corn that is at the similar stage of growth as yours that didn't get a fungicide. And if you walk in there and go, oh my Lord, this stuff is getting eaten alive by tar spot, there's tar spot everywhere, I would strongly consider putting that R3, R4 application on your corn. If you walk into unsprayed corn in late July, early August, and you're going, damn, looks like I pissed my money away on my fungicide. Why did I spray? This looks just as clean as mine. You don't need to do that late application. But we've learned the last 3 years that more humidity doesn't necessarily have to be rain. More humidity in June is what tar spot thrives on, and we're coming into, and we've been in a relatively moist, relatively humid, perfect growing conditions so far June, with a forecast that makes it look like that's going to continue. And we do know, we can't guarantee you that it's going to be a bad tar spot year, but we do know that that's what tar spot likes. So I'll shut up and let Kurt talk.
So in a bad, in 2021, the bad tar spot year, where the things that worked the best, guys, were the early fungicide V5 to V7, like Lance was referencing earlier. And I don't know that really does anything, but it does help the overall health of the plant, and that just seems to help with the whole tar spot thing. The other one, probably the biggest thing that year was the earlier the fungicide went on, the better the end result was. And I just use the analogy, guys. It's kind of like, if you've got tar spot bad, it's kind of like wait until the water hemp's 12 inches high before you spray.
Right. Yeah.
You could kill it maybe.
This would be the equivalent of a brown silk fungicide application.
Yeah, and that's the analogy I like to use. So if you can stay ahead of it, you're going to have way better success and way better end results. So to Lance's point, my favorite time to spray, I tell my retailers, when we're spraying Delaro Complete, I say, when you see 80 to 90% of the tassels out, schedule your spraying. I said, because by the time the plane gets there, it's going to be perfect.
Right.
And I said, not only that, that plane's probably going to get there in about a day that time of year because of all the people that like to wait.
Those of us who don't like to wait are thankful for those who do.
Right, exactly.
We get better service that way. So
we get our field sprayed.
Do that to somebody else's corn.
Right. 12 hours after we turn the order in. And I'm okay with that personally. But if you wait until all the tassels out, well, then all of a sudden you're 5 days down the list, and it's maybe not optimal timing.
Mm-hmm.
So think about that, and then there's a rate component too. It seems like the year, and especially with the products that have a rate range, Delaro Complete has a rate range. 10's better than 8, 12's better than 10.
Yep.
So and so there's a component there. So if it looks like we are starting to see lesions at that 4th of July timeframe, like Lance said, I would strongly encourage you guys to use at least 10 and consider 12. Yeah. So, because you will have that will help lengthen out that residual time, and you might still only get 3 weeks, but if you've got tar spot lesions showing up on the 4th of July and you spray 8 ounces or a lower rate of fungicide, you might start seeing new lesions again at 10 days. So, that's kind of the thinking and the idea.
Rate also helps a lot with the coverage challenges that we have in a corn crop too, because it's hard to get the whole plant treated. And, if you're using 12 ounces and you only get 50% coverage, you've still got some protection.
Right.
If you're using 8 ounces with 50% coverage, you don't have a lot of protection there. And ideally, no matter what rate you're using, we want good coverage, but we know there's limitations to that. And, so the things I like to talk about with fungicides, first would be products. So you can use single mode products, you can use a dual mode product. There's a lot of 3-mode products on the marketplace today. Not all products are created equal. It's just like herbicides. There's certain, HPPD chemistry that's good on this species, and some HPPD chemistry is good on other species. So not every strobe has the same efficacy on all different species of diseases. Same with triazole, same with the SDHI components. And so you can't necessarily just say, well, I've got an SDHI in mine, so I'm good on XYZ. Well, there's certain modes that are better on other species, and within a mode, they don't all have the same spectrum of control. So product does matter, rate does matter. Rate and product matter a lot. Timing matters a lot, and application matters somewhat also. We've got what is there? There's we got planes, we got helicopters, we got drones, and ground rigs. So we got four ways you can put a fungicide on. in my opinion, the way you want to do it and the way that you can do it timely is the best way to do it. I don't like to speak ill of any method and I've actually used all four of those methods on my own farm. And there's things I hate about all of them, to be honest with you. I don't like wheel tracks from ground rigs. I don't like the coverage that you sometimes get with the aerial applications. 5 gallon is a lot better than 2, but nobody's going to put on 5 gallon with any sort of aerial application. I've seen helicopters do a better job than planes. I've seen helicopters do just as bad a job as planes. There's fields of trees around them that I don't care what you do, you're not going to do a good job of spraying that field. So there's limitations to all that stuff, and do the best job that you can do. Be timely, use a good product, use the highest rate you can stand of that, regardless of what product you're using, use the highest rate you can stand would be my recommendation.
Mine as well.
So it's not just Kurt and I trying to sell product. That will indirectly happen if you use a higher rate, but we're recommending the higher rate because it's going to give you better protection. And I've even seen situations where in the absence of disease, we get a bigger yield increase out of a higher rate. How many of you have seen that overlap area where you and your neighbor drift on each other and something magical happens? I've had guys that have accidentally, not recommending off-label applications, but maybe accidentally mixed up the wrong rate of something and put a lot out there. And lo and behold, that spot was really good.
Really good.
So a lot of evidence to support, even in the absence of disease, higher rates, is gonna increase your odds of seeing something really good out of your fungicide program. So not trying to scare everybody, but if you've been thinking, boy, my crop looks so good, I'm not sure I need to put fungicide on it, or gosh, I don't like this corn price, I don't think I want to use fungicide. I would be very afraid of skimping on my fungicide program with the potential that this crop appears to have today and the weather that we've had so far in June and the weather that's forecasted for the next 10 days. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with everything you said, Lance. I mean, now is not the time to quit.
Right.
With the,
right.
The commodity prices are a little challenging at the moment, but it's still, if you just run the ROI on it, even at traditional levels, we're still in a good spot.
Right.
And if we do have more risk for disease or tar spot, that ROI will do nothing but increase.
Right.
So
right.
we need to keep. That's what we need to keep in mind, guys. So
yeah, and I've got data. Other people have generated the same data to support. Actually, when you look at your application cost is fixed. And whether you're putting on a half rate, a 3/4 rate, or a full rate, you're going to invest the same amount of money in getting across the field.
Right.
And so I know some producers that have been using full rates for several years, just based on the fact that, well, look, I'm already there. I'm already investing a lot of money in just getting the product applied. I'm going to do the best job I can do while I'm there. And that, supports, the idea of using that full rate. Most of you, if you haven't, maybe studied the label, you might not know that there's a rate range in the label, but generally speaking, with the exception of a couple products, and I think those products also secretly wish they had a rate range as well.
I do too.
Yeah, because that idea that I don't have a rate range because I'm putting out my full rate,
the right amount.
I ain't buying that.
I would argue that.
Yeah. Yep. So everybody who has the option to put out a higher rate should be considering that. So, all right. Any other questions, Heather?
No,
have come
no
in? No,
questions.
we're well past our hour. We've gotten to the end of my list here. Kurt and I can talk forever. Or at least I can.
Yeah.
Kurt's not really to blame for that. But anyway, thank you for your question. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in a couple weeks, which is when, Heather? Do you have any idea when that is?
I should have that ready by now.
That's one thing. That's one thing the producer is supposed to do is know when.
June 26th.
June 26th. Okay, so June 26th, we'll be back with our next episode. And by that time, the way rate we're going, there'll be some corn that's about ready to put fungicide on.
It will be.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have tassels in June this year for sure, unless something awful happens, which hopefully that doesn't happen.
Hopefully that does not happen.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks again, and everybody stay safe, and appreciate your questions and your time. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.